Since ancient times, hearing God's call is both a privilege and a responsibility, and anyone who's experienced it knows that when God calls, He calls us to something grand, but not always easy. He doesn't promise a paved and easy road. On the contrary, this path demands courage, determination, and a generous dose of faith. It's like an athlete preparing for the competition of their life. Each test along the way strengthens, shapes, and refines our character. The Bible shows us figures like Moses, who heard the call and faced deserts and endless trials, always confident that God had a greater purpose for him. And why are tests part of the journey? Because they are the divine method of refining who we are, removing any impurity that might prevent us from fulfilling our purpose. It's remarkable to think that God even uses difficulties to build something better within us, like gold being purified by fire. In moments of crisis, many wonder if they're on the right path. But these difficulties don't mean God has abandoned us. On the contrary, it's in these moments that He's closest, shaping our patience, as He did with Abraham, who had to wait patiently to see God's promises fulfilled. To answer this call, it's essential to understand that suffering and struggles are part of the package, one that only those with a strong heart and faith can carry. Those who truly want to dive deep into this journey must embrace trials as an essential part of the process. It's like that old saying, only those who weather storms can truly appreciate the sun. In Joseph's life, for instance, each setback seemed like a step backward. But in the end, everything worked together for the greater plan God had reserved for him. He is proof that, even in the worst circumstances, God is at work. But anyone who thinks these tests are punishments is mistaken. In truth, they are blessings in disguise. Each difficulty serves as a practical lesson in spiritual growth and maturity. It's like learning to swim by being thrown into the sea. At first it's scary, but gradually you discover strengths you didn't even know you had. Daniel in the lion's den and his friends in the fiery furnace are examples of how trials are not meant to destroy us, but to reveal what we're truly capable of when we trust in God's care. And here lies the central point. God calls us, and along with that call comes continuous refinement. This is the journey of transformation He proposes, an adventure where pain becomes learning, and each difficulty is one more step toward our ultimate purpose. It's not easy, but as Paul himself said, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me, and that's the spirit that keeps the call alive within us. And speaking of the strength that God grants, there's a test that requires patience. Patience is a virtue that God often cultivates in us through delays and silences. Waiting is not easy, especially when the heart longs for an answer, but it is in this waiting time that God works in the unseen, preparing everything around us. Imagine Abraham, who received a grand promise yet had to wait years for its fulfillment. Each day of waiting was a lesson in faith, a test that strengthened him for what was to come. His patience was the fertile soil where trust in God was planted and grew. Waiting does not mean inaction. On the contrary, it is a silent yet powerful action. During this time, we can develop a faith that goes beyond what we see, a faith rooted in the certainty that God is in control, even when our eyes see no sign of it. Abraham, while he waited, remained steadfast, believing in God's promise even when time seemed to be against him. This teaches us that patience is not just about enduring, but about fully trusting, always remembering that all things work together for the good of those who love God. It is in these moments of waiting that the greatest temptations to give up or take shortcuts arise. But that's when patience proves to be indispensable. When Sarah, Abraham's wife, grew impatient, she suggested an alternative solution, bringing consequences that shook the family's harmony. However, God did not give up on fulfilling His promise, and this story shows us that trusting in divine patience is always the best path. We learn that even when our plans seem faster or more efficient, God's timing is perfect. For those who wait on God, each moment of patience is an investment. It's like planting a seed that one day will yield abundant fruit. The Bible is full of examples of people who waited and in the end were rewarded in extraordinary ways. Joseph waited in prison, Daniel waited in the den, and even Jesus, in fulfilling his ministry, respected God's timing. They teach us that patience is not a waste of time, but rather God's way of working in and through us, shaping us for something greater. And if we think patience is a difficult test, imagine when it intertwines with faith amid uncertainties. Patience and faith go hand in hand, one supporting the other, forming the solid foundation on which we build our trust in God. And speaking of that, the next test on the path for those who trust in the Lord is precisely this: faith, which endures even when everything around us seems to crumble. Faith is that flame that keeps hope alive, even when everything seems lost. And God, in His wisdom, tests us precisely in the areas where we most need to strengthen this trust. Consider the story of Job, a righteous man who lost everything in an instant. His friends questioned him. His own wife suggested he give up, but Job remained steadfast, believing that God was still with him, even in the midst of the storm. His faith was like a rock that withstood the waves of doubt and despair. Like Job, many of us face times when logic and reason can't explain what we're going through. It's in these moments that faith is challenged to a new level, as we need to trust in something beyond what our eyes can see. Faith is not just believing when things go well. It's being certain that God is present in the silence and shadows. Abraham is another powerful example. He was called to sacrifice his own son, a request that defies any human understanding. But he pressed on, believing that God had a purpose, even if hidden. This blind trust in God, even without understanding the reasons, is what distinguishes authentic faith. Many say they have faith, but a single adversity can make them question God's love. Job and Abraham show us that true faith doesn't waver with circumstances. They knew that even when everything seemed lost, God was faithful and would not abandon them. And this is the type of faith God desires in each of us. A faith that doesn't rely on what we have or see, but is anchored in God's unshakable character. When we face the test of faith, our perspective changes, and we begin to see adversities as opportunities to demonstrate our trust in God. Perhaps the faith we need today isn't for something as extreme as Abraham's sacrifice, but maybe it's to trust that God is working in the small details of our lives. Reading the Bible, talking to God in prayer, and surrounding ourselves with others who share our faith are practical ways to strengthen this daily trust, building a solid foundation that supports us in difficult times. And since faith is the basis of everything, it needs constant support to avoid weakening. Each time our faith is tested and approved, it becomes stronger and prepares us for new challenges. And one of the most profound ways to demonstrate this faith is through obedience to God, especially when He asks us to do something that seems hard to understand. This is the next step in this journey of trials. Obedience to God is not always easy, especially when what He asks of us challenges our understanding. Often to obey means surrendering our own will and embracing a path that may seem uncertain. Saul, for instance, is one of the biblical characters who faced this test, but unfortunately failed. By disobeying God's command, Saul lost his kingdom and God's blessing, showing that obedience is an act of trust that God deeply values. Obedience is about placing God at the center and understanding that He knows what is best for us, even if we don't understand everything. There are times when God asks something of us that seems absurd or difficult to accept, as when Ananias was called to pray for Saul, a persecutor of Christians. Ananias, filled with fear and doubts, questioned this mission, but he went ahead and obeyed. And thanks to his obedience, Saul was transformed into Paul, one of Christianity's greatest apostles. It is this obedience amid fear that reveals a true, committed faith. Even when God's request challenges our understanding, obedience opens doors to miracles we could never imagine. Obedience, in truth, is an act of surrender. When we obey God, we acknowledge that He has a purpose greater and higher than our limited vision. Peter experienced this when he was called to cast his net at a time when fishing seemed futile. Logic told him it wasn't worth trying, but he trusted Jesus' word and was rewarded with an abundant catch. This example teaches us that obeying God may seem illogical, but it always comes with hidden blessings. In our daily lives, the test of obedience can manifest in simpler actions, like forgiving those who hurt us or helping someone in need. God gives us small opportunities to obey, and by doing so, each gesture reveals our commitment to following His ways. Reading the Bible daily and seeking to hear God's voice in prayer are practical ways to keep aligned with His divine will, so that, when greater tests come, we can respond with sincere obedience, as the great biblical examples did. And when we think we've given all we have, there remains the question of integrity. Obedience is strengthened when we have an upright character that seeks to do what is right, regardless of circumstances. And in this next test, the test of integrity, we will see how deeply our commitment to God is revealed in the moments when no one else is watching. Integrity is that virtue that withstands the test of time, showing who we really are when no one else is looking. Daniel is a powerful example of someone who kept his integrity intact, even in a hostile environment. He was in Babylon, surrounded by a culture that constantly tried to turn him away from his faith, yet Daniel remained faithful to God's principles. Even when he was forbidden to pray, he didn't hesitate to continue his daily prayers. His integrity was like a light in the darkness, a living proof that character doesn't bend to circumstances. Another striking example is Joseph, who, even when sold as a slave and falsely accused, maintained his honesty and loyalty. When tempted by Potiphar's wife, Joseph could easily have given in to gain advantages, but he chose integrity. He preferred to face prison than betray the trust that God and Potiphar had placed in him. This decision not only saved him from a trap, but also paved the way for him to become a prominent figure in Egypt. His integrity was rewarded with a position of honor, showing that God values and honors those who remain faithful. Integrity is doing what is right, even when no one is there to applaud. It is like a solid foundation that supports the entire structure of our spiritual life. Many face situations in daily life where honesty is tested, whether at work, in the family, or among friends. The temptation to take a shortcut to make things easier can be strong, but integrity reminds us that our commitment to God is greater. A life of integrity builds credibility and trust, not only before others, but, most importantly, before God. For those who wish to strengthen this virtue, a good start is practicing transparency in small decisions, avoiding lies, acting justly, and always seeking to do what is right are actions that day by day shape our character. Reading passages about Daniel or Joseph inspires us to remain steadfast, even when external pressure is strong. Integrity is like a shield that protects us from corruption and keeps us aligned with divine values, giving us the strength to resist temptation. And as demanding as integrity is, it also prepares the heart for something equally important: humility. For when we recognize our dependence on God to remain upright, we understand that without Him, we are nothing. And it is precisely this humility that leads us to the next challenge, the test that shapes our heart in total submission to God. Humility is the virtue that reminds us that before God, we are utterly dependent and in need of His grace. Moses, for example, was a powerful leader, but always recognized that strength and wisdom came from God, not himself. Even with the burden of leading a people for decades, he kept a humble heart, seeking divine direction at every step. His humility was evident, and this quality pleased God in his leadership. Moses teaches us that true power is not in self-exaltation, but in complete dependence on God. David is another example reflecting this virtue. Although he was a king and had authority over a nation, David did not become proud. He knew that without God, he would have accomplished nothing. When he made mistakes, he was humble enough to acknowledge them and seek divine forgiveness. This humble posture allowed him to maintain a sincere and deep relationship with God, something that sustained him through trials. David's story is a reminder that humility opens space for God's mercy to work in our lives, healing, restoring, and strengthening us. But of all examples, Jesus is the greatest teacher of humility. Being the Son of God, he did not hesitate to humble himself and serve, washing his disciples' feet and walking alongside the marginalized. He showed us that humility is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It is the willingness to put others' needs above our own and to honor God in every action. Jesus teaches us that true greatness lies in serving, and it is this humility that draws us closer to the heart of God and to our fellow humans. Practicing humility, however, is not always easy, especially in a world that values self-promotion and the pursuit of recognition. But it is possible to cultivate this virtue by constantly seeking to place God and others first. In every decision, no matter how small, we can ask, does this please God? Does this help my neighbor? Simple actions like listening to others without judgment and valuing what each person brings to the world are ways to live humility daily. Humility teaches us to see the value in others, to respect, and to learn from differences. And as we practice this humility, we prepare ourselves to face an even greater test, perseverance. Because without a humble heart, it's hard to endure adversity with patience and faith. Humility strengthens us for the next stage, where we'll learn that perseverance is the key to staying firm, regardless of the difficulties that may arise along the way. Perseverance is that quality that drives us forward, even when circumstances seem to push us back. Noah is a clear example of perseverance. He spent years building an ark, following God's instructions, while everyone around him ridiculed him. In an unbelieving and hostile world, he remained steadfast, believing in God's word and the purpose of his mission. Noah's perseverance teaches us that sometimes fulfilling God's will requires patience and resilience to criticism, trusting that, in the right moment, the divine plan will be revealed. Another powerful example is the Apostle Paul, who faced imprisonment, persecution, and even shipwrecks, but never gave up on his mission. He knew that walking with God would not be easy, but he believed that each difficulty brought him closer to the greater purpose. Paul's life shows that perseverance isn't about the absence of challenges, but the strength to keep believing and moving forward despite hardships. His unshakable conviction in the mission God gave him is an invitation for each of us to stand firm, even when circumstances discourage us. To persevere is to resist, to persist, to keep our focus on the final goal. In our lives, tests of perseverance come in many forms. An illness that seems incurable, a dream that seems distant, or a relationship facing hard times. Just like Noah and Paul, we are called to keep our eyes fixed on God and to believe that every effort has its worth. Perseverance, when fueled by faith, turns each small victory into a step closer to God's purpose. To strengthen this perseverance, it's essential to seek God's presence daily in prayer and study of the Bible. These moments are the fuel that helps us renew our strength and persist even on the darkest days. Meditating on promises like, "I can do all things through him who strengthens me," reminds us that we are not alone in this journey. The Bible is full of verses and stories that encourage perseverance, showing that those who persist in faith always find reward, whether here and now or in eternity. And speaking of rewards, it's important to remember that all this perseverance serves something far greater, the purpose God has set for each of us, because in the end, it's this purpose that gives us the strength to keep going. And it's precisely this purpose we'll explore in the next test, where discovering and embracing the mission God has entrusted to us becomes the great challenge to be faced. Discovering and embracing the purpose that God has set for each of us is a journey that requires courage and discernment. Esther, for example, faced this challenge when she realized she was in a strategic position to save her people. She could have chosen silence and safety, but she understood that God had placed her there for something greater. Esther's decision shows us that the divine purpose is not always easy to identify or accept, but when we embrace it, we can accomplish the unimaginable. Her story invites us to ask ourselves, what is God's purpose for me? Like Esther, Joseph also faced countless adversities before finally understanding his purpose. Sold by his own brothers and unjustly imprisoned, he could have rebelled or given up. However, Joseph remained steadfast and confident in God's plan, and in the end, he became a crucial figure in Egypt, saving his people from famine. Joseph's journey teaches us that God's purpose sometimes takes us through paths of suffering and misunderstanding, but it always reveals itself as a perfect and meaningful plan. It's as if each obstacle were a piece of the puzzle of our calling. Accepting God's purpose does not mean that everything will be clear at once. Often, He reveals only one step at a time, like a lamp illuminating the path as we move forward. This is an invitation to trust and follow, even when the way seems dark. Each person has a unique calling, a mission that only they can fulfill. The Bible is filled with stories of ordinary people who, by embracing God's purpose, transformed the world around them. Esther and Joseph are examples, showing that no one is too small to accomplish something great in God's eyes. To discover our own purpose, it's important to have a heart attentive to God's voice. Praying, seeking wise counsel, and serving others are actions that draw us closer to our calling. God uses our abilities, experiences, and even our pain to shape this purpose. When someone makes themselves available to be an instrument in God's hands, they become capable of transforming realities, inspiring other lives, and making a difference. Finding purpose is living with fullness, knowing that each action, each choice, is aligned with something eternal and greater. And it's this vision of eternity that motivates us to keep going, for we know that our work in God is never in vain. But to reach the purpose, we go through tests and trials that prepare us and draw us closer to God. And this journey of trials culminates in a reward that goes beyond this world, an eternal reward that God promises to those who persevere to the end. The trials we face throughout life are not mere obstacles, they are steps God uses to shape our character and strengthen our faith. Each challenge, each moment of pain or waiting draws us closer to the purpose He has laid out. It's like a refiner who purifies gold, removing all impurities to reveal something of incalculable value. From Abraham's patience to Jesus' humility, all the great characters of the Bible teach us that trials are part of the path leading to eternity. God does not allow these trials in vain. He is preparing each of us for something much greater. The reward promised to those who persevere is immeasurable. The crown of eternal life, mentioned in the Bible, is one of the promises that drives us to continue, even when everything around us seems to fall apart. Every step of faith, every act of obedience, every demonstration of integrity contributes to this divine reward. God values those who choose to follow Him, even when the conditions are unfavorable. And this daily choice to live according to His will is a treasure He keeps for us, something the world cannot take away. In moments of weakness, it's common to question why we endure so much suffering. But the Bible reminds us that all things work together for the good of those who love God. Difficulties are temporary, but the glory that awaits us is eternal. Noah, Paul, Esther, Joseph, all were rewarded, not only in this life, but also in eternity. These examples give us strength to continue, knowing that each trial overcome is a step closer to God and to eternal life. It's this promise that sustains and gives meaning to our journey of faith. Each trial, when conquered, bears fruits we can share with the world. Our story becomes a testimony, a light for those still on the path. Trials, when faced with faith and perseverance, transform us into instruments of God, capable of inspiring and building lives. What a privilege it is to be part of God's plan. And as we reach the end of our journey, we'll know that every effort, every tear was worth it for the glory that awaits us with the Father. And so, God's message is complete. Those who persevere receive more than they imagine, for they inherit what is eternal. Now, it's up to each of us to share this message, inviting others to know and live the path of faith. And it's with this call that we close, inviting you to be part of this mission, to spread the word and multiply the impact of this truth. Having come this far, you now know the 7 trials God places before us as a path of transformation and spiritual growth. These steps reveal how much God works in our lives, shaping every detail, every challenge, to draw us closer to Him and to our true essence. But this knowledge is not just for you. It's a message that can reach and transform many other lives. How about sharing this wisdom? Think of how many people around you also face hardships and need to hear about this journey of faith and perseverance. You can be part of something greater by passing this message on. By sharing this video, you not only inspire, but also help create a network of faith and hope, expanding the impact of this biblical truth. After all, we all go through trials, but knowing they have a purpose can change how we handle each challenge. Click share and send it to someone special, someone you know who needs this word. Together, you'll be strengthening this chain of divine love and wisdom. Furthermore, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that uplifts and strengthens your walk with God. Enable notifications so you won't miss any video, as each message is an opportunity for growth, reflection, and deepening of faith. And remember, every time you connect with this community, you also become a channel of blessings, supporting a mission that reaches lives and transforms hearts. And before you go, leave a comment. Share how these trials impact your life, how each step resonates in your heart. Your story and experiences can be a powerful testimony for others who are also seeking purpose and direction. So, share your voice, inspire, and strengthen this faith community. Together, we can grow and stay strong on the path God has prepared for us.